Juror number 2's reading the Christopher Reeve Story, and Anora's a bit of a heretic with small things like these. I'm Van Connor.
And I'm Adam Ball, and this is Off Screen, your 7-day guide to everything movies.
Boom.
Groovy.
So, welcome back to Off Screen. We have got loads of movies to talk about this time round. We're going to look at Anora, small things like these, the Christopher Reeve Story as well in a moment. But let's start with Juror, which, from its name, I'm gathering is a bit of a courtroom thriller.
Yeah, Juror number 2. Before we get to that, though, a bit of housekeeping for this episode. Okay, because it's a stacked episode. And for the podcast edition, if you're listening to this on radio, then you may want to go and check out the podcast edition, because it's going to be about 15 minutes longer. And the reason it's going to be 15 minutes longer, as you know, you will quickly learn in about 20 minutes' time, is because this is our 430th show. And of course, number 430, we thought, why not go with the cheesiest tie-in ever and get the director of the 430 movie? So I sat down this week and chatted to one of my lifelong heroes. I chatted to Kevin Smith, writer-director of the 430 movie, which is out now. And of course, the legendary creator of Clerks, Dogma, Mallrats, Chasing Amy, Jay and Silent Bob Strike. Yeah, he's Silent Bob. I mean, it was a big moment for me. Anyway, that's all in the podcast edition. Obviously, if you listen to this on radio, it will not include the interview. But yeah. In the meanwhile, we go from one legend to another, though, as you point out, Juror number 2. And did you know, Mr. Ball, this is going to be the final work of the legendary Clint Eastwood?
No, so he's actually said that, has he?
He's directing this. So this is, because is he 94? I think Clint Eastwood is 94 years old now. He said for a number of years, Juror number 2 is going to be his final film. And it does effectively play like his 12 Angry Men. You know the classic 12 Angry Men story with the jury in the room, and kind of like that with a bit of a spin. But it is like a vintage 90s Clint Eastwood thriller. Like I say, he's 94. This marks his final directorial efforts, going out through Warner Brothers as well. And there is some controversy there about the relationship with Warner Brothers, because he's kind of been a baby of Warner Brothers. He's been one of the jewels in the crown of Warner Brothers for decades. Like, legendarily makes his films on the cheap, ahead of time, gets them in under budget and before deadline every time. Always has done. He's won Oscars, for his directorial work. He's come out with some absolute bangers. I mean, $1 Million Baby is one of his. Unforgiven. I mean, he was going to do the Star Is Born remake a few years ago that wound up going to Bradley Cooper. And speaking of whom, he made American Sniper with the studio as well. So now he's brought this legal thriller to us. It stars Nicholas Hoult, as well as Toni Collette, Zoe Deutsch, J.K. Simmons. Murderous row of talent appearing there, including Kiefer Sutherland, which I will get to. Nicholas Hoult is a young writer who's an expectant father. His wife's heavily pregnant wife is due to pop any day now, and he goes to jury duty. Sits, in the jury box. He is, of course, the juror number 2 of the title, and is asked to serve as in the jury for a murder trial. A young woman whose body has been found over the side of a highway, sort of a highway overpass, a very treacherous road and overpass. No sooner has he sat in and started to hear the evidence, however, then he starts to remember a little something. Namely, that exactly 1 year previous, he was driving on that road and he thought he hit a deer. But it was very rainy, very dark. He couldn't find the deer. He thought it just went over the side. Can you guess what he might have figured out?
Was it him?
Of course. So you've got the juror who, as far as he is concerned, has committed the actual crime that he is asking to preside over. And be it guilt or the incredibly mounting evidence, the tension starts to build as the walls start to close in around him. I've got a clip for you, and this is him meeting with his AA sponsor / lawyer, played by Kiefer Sutherland. So have a listen.
So I went to clear my head and found myself at Rowdy's hideaway. Ordered a drink and sat there for a while. Then I got up and left. I went about a quarter of a mile and I hit something. So I got out the car and I looked around. I checked. I didn't see anything, and I figured it was a deer that ran off. And then I got back in the car and went home.
Okay, what's the problem?
I got called for jury duty, the Kendall Carter case. They found her body in a creek bed about a quarter mile from Rowdy's Hideaway last October.
What are you telling me?
Maybe I didn't hit a deer.
So essentially then, he's got to decide whether a particular person is guilty or not guilty of something that he knows he is guilty of.
Exactly that, and therein lies the sort of big moral quandary, because it's not so much about just risking his own life and not being there for his own child, for instance, as he's told at one point. If you have a history of alcohol abuse, there's no way they'll believe that you were sober at the time, for instance, when you were driving. You will go to prison for life for this. And yeah, it's a really tense one. Of course, it comes with that moral quandary as well, of sending the innocent man to prison. Although he's not the nicest person in the universe, as is perceived to be, he's still innocent of the crime he's there for. And it's a great concept. You've got to be as a concept. It's a good one. And we talked about this. What was that film? We talked about one about a year ago that starred Tommy Lee Jones and Jamie Foxx. Do you remember? The one set in the 90s. Courtroom. It was kind of funny. It was a bit of a funny one.
Vaguely remember, but I couldn't tell you what it was called. Yeah, I do.
I can't now. We said at the time, though, I think that was an Amazon Prime movie, but we said at the time, we just don't get these movies anymore. Like a good old-fashioned, like for grown-ups, legal thriller. And they don't really make them. And you can look at things in this century. You can look at things like Fracture, The Lincoln Lawyer obviously leaps to mind. Runaway Jury was 2003. It's not a thing we see that much of anymore. And yet it used to be the bread and butter of Hollywood. Like every star had one once upon a time. I mean, Cruise had like 3 to his name, and obviously A Few Good Men is one of the archetypical ones now. But in this case, this is going back to 12 Angry Men, with a sort of a John Grisham-y edge on that. And as far as Clint Eastwood, the director, goes, Clint Eastwood has always been a spectacular director because he has this innate sense of what I've always referred to as American Regency. For the lack of a better term, it's a polished, robust product. You know that there's not going to be any slack jobs being done whilst Clint Eastwood's around, kind of thing. Performances are all very good. Murderer's Row of talent in there. You do get a bit of an About a Boy reunion, which makes me very happy because Toni Collette is the DA who's prosecuting the case, and then you've got Nicholas Hoult in the lead, so it's kind of the mum and son from About a Boy, which makes me very, very happy. In a week in which Hugh Grant has a new movie out, like 3/4 of the main cast of About a Boy are back in cinemas this week, which thrills me to my absolute core. It maybe gets a little bit messy towards the end, largely because it can't quite seem to decide if it wants to go the more sensationalist route that it would have to, or if it wants to leave you wanting, effectively. And it kind of sits in the middle and leaves you unsatisfied for both, really. I was kept swept up in it because it did have that sort of an old school 90s vibe. Not like it's in the 90s or anything like that, but just like, a legal thriller like we used to see in the 90s, like that Jamie Foxx and Tommy Lee Jones one that we can't remember the name of. But yeah, it's something that I would recommend, for instance, to my mum to watch after she watches Fracture again next time, because she watches that about every 6 months. But if you are someone that likes A Few Good Men, Fracture, Lincoln Lawyer, unmissable stuff. This is very much in that pantheon. I thought it was tightly performed. I thought it was well directed. I just thought that the script maybe went a little bit off the rails towards the end. And the note that it chooses to go out on, I thought was pretty weak. It was the film trying to have its cake and eat it, and it didn't work. Like I say, you come away from it pretty unsatisfied, but you do get a rock-solid 3.5-star pretty nostalgic, in a sense, thriller. And if Clint Eastwood wants to go out on his version of 12 Angry Men, which I'm choosing to call 12 Vaguely Miffed People, then more power to him. You know what? Fare thee well, Clint. It was a hell of a run.
Well, there you go. You can go and watch The Final Goodbye from Clint Eastwood, Juror number 2, in cinemas from today. Right, next then, we're going to cover Small Things Like These and the Superman Christopher Reeve story. We'll see what Van thought to those in just a tick. Stay there. Hello and welcome back to Off Screen. Before we dive into our next movie, Van, you just found out which movie we were talking about, courtroom drama, when we were discussing Juror number 2.
Yeah, the Jamie Foxx, Tommy Lee Jones one was called The Burial, and the reason it was called that is because Tommy Lee Jones, the plaintiff in the case in the movie, ran a funeral home, didn't he? He was being driven out by Big Funeral or something, wasn't it? I should watch that again. It was good fun. But yes, so we've had a half decent courtroom drama in cinemas. That's a nice thing.
Exactly that. Well, let's look at the next two. We've got Small Things Like These in a second. But first, this has come around at a really kind of weird time for me because literally 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was just falling in a YouTube hole, as you do, and I was YouTubing just loads of videos of Christopher Reeve because I was an enormous Superman fan. It was my movie growing up along with Top Gun. And I just decided I want to find out a bit more about him, actually. I know that he fell off a horse, and I know that he did something to himself, and I know that was ultimately the end to him after a long time suffering, but I wanted to find out more, and I guess that's what this is about.
Yes, Superman. So it's super/man. So it's Super or Man, the Christopher Reeve Story, which is a new documentary and is the very first film to be distributed by DC Studios, which is the new James Gunn-led administration for, what used to be the DCEU. They have chosen this for their first project. It was made independently, and then it was shown to James Gunn at some point, and he fell in love with it and decided they had to buy the rights to it, they had to distribute it through DC, it was where it belonged, it was the perfect tribute. And having seen the film, I can absolutely imagine how that afternoon went, because you can absolutely see what James Gunn saw in it. So it is the warts and all chronicle of the story of Christopher Reeve. It's not so much about his upbringing or anything like that, although that is a component in it. But what it does is it contrasts very cleverly the rise and career of Christopher Reeve as Superman with his then journey through his injury and, rehabilitation and recovery, and then subsequent activism leading up to his death and the death of his late wife, Dana Reeve, as well. It's really something. It's all framed as well around this visual trope of using an actual statue, like a computer-generated statue of Christopher Reeve as Superman. And although the statue doesn't physically change, the statue stays the same, different things and different visual tropes happen to the statue to actually illustrate where you are in the story at any given time. So when they're documenting his injury, for instance, and his eventual condition, you actually see kryptonite start to form on the statue in the exact places that his injuries were. So the impact point on his neck that saw him, paralyzed from the neck down and unable to move, mostly unable to move again. We see that impact point start as a lump of kryptonite on the throat and spread outwards through his veins, things like that. It's an interesting visual technique for it, and at the heart of it, as I say, it's just this incredibly moving chronicle of the life and times of Christopher Reeve. And a little bit that I didn't quite know about the story of Christopher Reeve, his friendship with the late, great Robin Williams. So have a listen. This is a clip from Superman, the Christopher Reeve Story. This is his son.
It's Memorial Day weekend, 1995. My dad was competing in a cross-country horseback riding competition.
And was just so excited to get down there.
And my dad had been in London for some reason a few weeks before. We said goodbye, and I ran upstairs to, watch him, walk away. And I remember him turning, instinctively, knowing I would do that. And, he gave this wave. That was the last time I saw him on his feet.
I can imagine this being a really powerful, emotional documentary, actually.
I was a ruin when I left the screening room for this. I'm not even joking. I was destroyed. I was elated and heartwarmed, but I was a physical wreck when I came out of this. I mean, there were a good 3 or 4 times through this documentary in which I was just outright ugly crying, bawling my eyes out. It's a really beautiful film. And they very cleverly managed to build on the symbol of Superman with the music. A wonderful score, by the way, by Ilan Ershkovy, I think it is. A wonderful score that really builds on this idea of Superman, the symbol of hope, and then feeding you who Christopher Reeve became after, this injury. There is a story in there, and I never knew this. Never heard the story before, that when he was in rehab, like I think it's about a month after the accident, something like that, and he's trying to wean himself off the ventilator, that he started to interact with the patients for the first time. He didn't want to interact with the other residents or patients at first, and then he started to. And there was a young boy who was also struggling to wean himself off the breathing apparatus, and Christopher Reeve talked him into it. And as the kid tells, the kid's dad comes along and says, "What changed?" And the kid says, "Superman told me to do it." And you're like, "Oh, wow." And at that point, you just blub. You're like, "Oh, man, can you remember a time when that was a time when Superman was a symbol of hope?" And not only do you get that, you just get this absolutely wonderful, just lump in throat story. It doesn't shy away from the reality of the man either, and that I thought was quite admirable. They make no bones about, look, he was a human man, and he himself, in archival footage, we do get to say this. He says himself, "I'm not a hero. I'm just a physical person. I'm very flawed. I try to be a good person, but I'm flawed." And we get like the chronicles of his personal life and a brief period sort of around the time of Superman 3-ish, when he actually, went and lived as a single man for a while and got up to his wild ways, partying with Robin Williams, who incidentally, oh God, if you weren't already heartbroken over Robin Williams, you'll definitely be after this as well, because he was the man's biggest cheerleader. I somehow never knew this about Robin Williams. They were like best mates. And when it came to a lot of the costs for Christopher Reeve's recovery and things like that, it was Robin Williams picking up the bill. Robin Williams bought him the special bus that was needed to transport him to and from the airport and things like that. And you get this really lovely bro story at the center of it all as well, between these two absolute giants, heaped then with the tragedy of both of the obvious, health tragedy of it, the physical tragedy of what happened to Reeve, but also the sort of professional tragedy, the typecasting, the sort of dismissal by the industry, and how people saw him afterwards, and how he then sort of sees a resurgence in popularity almost because of the unfortunate events that took place around him, and how this poor family has just endured tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. His youngest son, for instance, loses his father, his mother, and his grandmother, I think, within 18 months. As we're told, he's about 10 years old at the time. And it's an absolutely devastating story, but it's not without its punch the air, triumph, cheer moments. It's phenomenal. It is absolutely breathtaking. I can't wait to see it again. I'm going to move on really quickly because I know we've only got about 2 minutes to talk about small plays like these, and we've not got a clip for that anyway. But I will say, do see Superman, the Christopher Reeve Story. It's beautiful.
Yeah, definitely 100% on my list. And you can see it in cinemas from today. Right, small things like these. So all I know about this is it's kind of a history drama.
Yeah, it's set in mid-80s Ireland. It stars Cillian Murphy, and this is kind of his first release, really, since Oppenheimer. So obviously there's that going for it, but having said that, it's not really a mainstream film. It's expected to do well in Ireland, but I don't think it's going to do well anywhere else. So Cillian Murphy is a local coal merchant in a small Irish village who has, as one of his clients, has the local Magdalen laundry. Do you know about the Magdalen laundries?
No idea what that is. These
were a series of industrial laundries in a time before people had washing machines, and they used to send people used to use a laundry service. These were the facilities, but they also doubled as homes for what they used to call ruined women. So bear in mind, this is Ireland we're talking about, and this happened for much of the 20th century. Ruined women, who are basically unwed pregnant women, were taken in by the nuns of these Magdalen homes and effectively used as slave labour after their children were carted off to the orphanage. This became a massive scandal in about 1993 when the bodies of, I think it was about 55 bodies were found in an unmarked grave outside on the land that belonged to one of these, and it actually set up the reveal that this had been happening through this system, which was intrinsically tied to the Irish government. None of that particularly happens in this movie. It's more of a kitchen sink drama in which Cillian Murphy simply witnesses that one of these places exists and finds himself drawn into effectively caring for one of the young girls who's, due to pop any day, who wants to escape the local Magdalene home. All of which seems to come about in the last 15 minutes of this mercifully short 98-minute film. It is one that is really only going to appeal to people who are really interested in the history of this, but for some reason don't want like a pacier thriller. Like I say, it's a kitchen sink drama. It's looking at a bigger problem through a much smaller character point of view, taking place over one particularly miserable-looking Christmas in the mid-1980s. Great performance from Cillian Murphy, obviously, because he's conscious. You know what I mean? If Cillian Murphy's conscious, he's going to act his skinny little arse off, isn't he? He's Cillian Murphy. The man just won an Oscar for acting. Like 6 months ago, won an Oscar for acting. Of course he's brilliant in it. It's worth noting, though, that this is very much a sort of old-school Cillian Murphy role. This is what Cillian Murphy used to do all the time, because I was worrying after Peaky Blinders and Oppenheimer that he was starting to get a bit cool on me. But no, Cillian's back. He's thespining his way back up top here. Like vintage kitchen sink drama. He's doing... Do you remember The Fast Show?
Yeah.
Remember Ted and Ralph in The Fast Show?
Yeah.
Is it Ted, who's the farmhand who just looks down at the ground and says, I wouldn't be known about that, sir. That is Cillian Murphy's performance in this movie. That is actually what Cillian Murphy's doing. Somehow it works, but I mean, not what you would call an entertaining film. My young mate Con, who was doing work experience at Lionsgate that day, he was in the screening with us. And he didn't know the Irish history or anything. I ran into him a couple of days later after he'd had a chance to process it all. And he said, I really enjoyed that. I think enjoyed is probably the wrong word, Con. Like, you wouldn't say you enjoyed Schindler's List, would you? You don't come out of Schindler's List being like, I enjoyed that. You're not going to enjoy this, but you will be engaged by it. You'll just wish maybe it was pacier and had slightly more to do with the actual Magdalene of it all, where I would rather have seen an actual chronicle of that, or even just a documentary about that. But it left me wanting. But I gather this is going to evidently be quite a big deal in Ireland. So, yeah.
Seems so. By the looks of it, I've been watching the trailer in the background when you've been talking and stuff, and it looks like a fairly sort of well-shot movie. I was loving sort of seeing some of the old 80s cars in there and stuff, so it's definitely authentic in that front. You know me and cars.
Yeah, there's something quite ashes to ashes about
yes,
that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly that. That's exactly the vibe I got. Small things like these in cinemas from today. Right, we've still got Anora coming up, and is it pronounced Heretic?
Heretic, yeah.
And Heretic. Well, we're going to see what both of those are like when we chat to Van about them in just a second. Plus, his legendary interview is next. Stay where you are.
Now it's time for a segment we like to call Off Screen Pays the Bills. Hey, Adam.
Hey, Van. So, what's going on?
Ain't nothing going on with the rent, you know how it is. And so it's a big thanks to our sponsors this week, and a good one for the musically inclined among us. Picture this, imagine managing an entire tour with just a few clicks. Sounds amazing, right? And that's what Turnwheel is all about. So Turnwheel's a platform built for the live music world. So whether you're an artist, manager, or tour manager, it's got all the tools you need to make your tour run smoother and more profitably. So forget the hassle of juggling spreadsheets and group chats. With Turnwheel, you can handle budgeting, track your expenses, and keep everyone in sync, all from one easy-to-use app. Thousands of users are already leveling up their tours with Turnwheel, so if you're ready to tour smarter, not harder, head to turnwheel.com and kick off a 14-day free trial. Because when you're on tour, every penny counts. So check out Turnwheel and make that road a little less rocky. Thanks again to our sponsors this week at Turnwheel. And now, back to the show.
Hello and welcome back to Off Screen. Right now then, it's something slightly different. As Van mentioned at the top of the show today, Van has managed to get, we could probably call it an exclusive interview because he probably talk about stuff that he doesn't normally talk about. But Van got an exclusive interview with the one and only Kevin Smith, who Van has been fanboying about ever since.
I'll tell you something. When you say exclusive, I actually did get an exclusive in this interview because I got the answer to a 22-year-old question in this interview. And I do need to explain this before we actually cut to the interview, because at one point I introduced an actual physical prop. That physical prop is a comic book from 2002 that Kevin Smith wrote and never finished. He wrote issue 1 of a comic series and then never wrote the rest. And it was called Daredevil Bullseye, The Target. And you know me, I'm a huge Daredevil fan.
Yeah,
and also so is Kevin Smith, and I'm a big Kevin Smith fan. So it's always been sort of part of the weird sort of overlap. So I did finally get to bring that up with him. So that's my exclusive towards the end. So I don't specifically say, what I'm holding up. I just needed to fill that in for myself. But he is obviously back on the scene at the moment to promote the 4:30 movie. We talked about it 2 weeks ago. So we talked about it back in number 428. But obviously the interview was coming up with, oh my God, it's the 430th show. We get to talk about the 430, the director of the 430 movie. That's perfect. So, if you remember the film, exactly that. If you remember the film, it was about a group of teens in the mid-1980s simply hanging out and trying to just see movies at the local cinema for the day. And it was made on the basis that Kevin Smith himself had bought his local cinema from when he was a kid. He had bought his local cinema, and before he refurbed it, because it still looked like it was from the 80s, he thought, well, why don't I just make a movie from the 80s, as he will explain. So on that note, touting his new, very John Hughes-inspired film, I present to you Kevin Smith.
Are you intentionally channeling the John Hughes with this one?
Oh, I was going for Hughes, man. Hands down, Hughes. I was raised on a steady diet of John Hughes movies when I was a kid. Like, he was our prophet. He saw us, you know what I'm saying? He was an adult who literally saw us as teenagers and wrote the way that we spoke and wrote about subjects that meant something to some of us, not everybody, but like he really was kind of the poet laureate of teen films of the 80s. And so I don't wind up doing what I do for a living without him, and I've made coming of age movies my entire career. And, Mallrats is definitely one of them. And Mallrats was me homaging the movies of John Hughes and John Landis as well, the movies I grew up loving. So when I went into this one, I knew, since I was trying to make a movie where people weren't going to curse a lot, like that's normally what I do, and they trade in vulgarity. I was going in for something that was, the way we spoke when we were kids, like circa 86. And I remember that Hughes was able to do it. Hughes didn't work blue, so to speak, a lot of PG-13 type stuff and whatnot. So other than I believe Weird Science was the R, if I remember correctly. Generally he could talk to his audience without talking down and without trying to sound like them, so to speak. And so I was like, let me go for it. And as much as I've homaged Hughes in the past, I'm going to try to make the most Kevin Smith version of a John Hughes movie, or the most John Hughes version of a Kevin Smith movie that I can. So yeah, it was me. You see a lot of filmmakers eventually try to make the movies they love, big pastime for a lot of filmmakers, oddly enough. And then I think it's of a certain age. Musical numbers. Like sooner or later, we all wind up doing a big musical number or something like that. And I wound up doing one in Clerks too, but that wasn't because I was like, oh, I'm a big musical fan. This movie, though, 430 movie, doesn't exist without me being a fan of the John Hughes catalog. So this is me kind of doing I'm a middle-aged man. Let me make the movie that I grew up making and then I fell in love with, and that made me want to be a filmmaker. And I owe a big debt of gratitude to Paul Thomas Anderson, because it was when I saw Licorice Pizza that I was like, oh shit, we're doing that now. We're allowed to go back and romanticize our childhood. I was like, that's like, he did such a good job. I was like, I want to do that one day. So it was in the back of my head for like a year before we bought the movie theater in my hometown that I grew up going to, and we named it Smog Castle Cinemas. Suddenly I had a location. And I was like, well, in a world where I got a location, let me write to it. That's kind of like how the best things in my body of work happen. Clerks was a location before it was a film. I had a convenience store. I was like, let me write a movie. Convenience store. And same here. It's like I had a movie theater. I was like, well, I'll make a movie set in a movie theater.
I mean, this is sort of a two-part question in a sense, because obviously this is a coming of age story that takes place, you know, in your teen heyday, your sort of origin story, as it were. And you know, Harley appears in the film. Your real life daughter appears in the film. What's that like? Restaging your own teen era and then including your actual adult daughter. How does that work?
She kept it from being a weird experience because I had originally hit her up about playing the male lead. I was like, let's gentle this motherfucker, man. Like, you can be a girl playing a boy, and who better than you to play young me? Because, like, my wife, Jennifer, for years has always been like, oh, Harley is just beardless, dickless you. So, I was like, well, great. She could play 16-year-old me. But my kid had enough sense to be like, Dad, no. She's like, I've been in therapy since I was 12. You know what this would do to me playing you in a movie? So, mercifully, she got excellent taste in men. And the dude she'd been sleeping with for 5 years, man, Austin, I was like, all right, well, step out of the way. I see somebody standing right behind you who could play the young me. So Austin winds up getting the job because Harley passed.
I mean, it's worth noting, of course, you have several of your alumni, really, within the movie. You've got Jeff Anderson, you've got Justin Long, who's a sort of relative. Is he still a newcomer? It's been a decade or so since he's he's sort of come into the fray. You've obviously got Jennifer Harley as well. At what point in the process of creating these movies, is there even a discussion anymore as to, oh, this is Jen's role, this is Harley's role? Is there a discussion had at any point, or is it just a sort of, you dump the script down on the copy table, say, that one's you, that one's Harley, that one's Jen? Is there any discussion there? Or?
I think when it came to like Harley, after I offered her like the male lead and she passed and stuff, then I was like, all right, well, why don't you play the female lead? Because you're going out with Austin and Austin will play the lead. And so you can play his girlfriend. And then she was like, do you really think I would ever play your high school girlfriend? She's going, that would send me into more fucking therapy. And I'm like, God damn it. I was like, and she chose the part that she wanted. She was like, is anybody playing Sister Sugar Walls? And I was like, the hooker nun? She was like, yeah, I want to play the hooker nun. And I was like, well, I guess I raised you right. And so she picked her part mercifully and had a blast like doing it. And because she played, Sister Sugar Walls, Jennifer was like, oh, can I be in the scene with her? And I was like, of course. So Jennifer winds up in that slot as well.
So, I mean, although it's not explicitly a film about filmmaking, there's no actual filmmaking within the film itself, it has, there is a message about the aspiring filmmaker in there. And that sort of makes it the third film that I can think of yours that really is about filmmaking. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we all, it's kind of the original credos of writing is, write what you know. Right. In this sort of day and age, with things as they are now, with the influencer economy, with us all having smartphones in our pockets, you yourself have pretty much always said what Genesis Rodriguez says within the movie, which is, you are a filmmaker, you've just not made your film yet. How do you find that the current economy of the influencer filmmakers, or do you feel a sort of burden of responsibility in that?
Oh, God, no. I mean, if I wanted responsibility, I would have got a real job. That's why I entered entertainment. Like, it was shirk responsibility and just self-aggrandize movie after movie. I feel like, I've been around long enough now at this point where even if people don't like what I do, they're like, well, he is what he says he is. He is a filmmaker. He may not be my filmmaker, but he is one. And because I made Clerks, because I started with a movie that anybody could fucking make. It's like a movie that makes you go like, well, shit, if that counts as a film, I think I could be a filmmaker. That has always kept me like, I guess in a place where I've had use for 30 years, right? Whether or not I'm impacting the culture with a brand new movie, like where everyone's discussing it or something. And like, that doesn't really happen that much to me anymore. But here I am, like, still doing it, like 16th film in 30 years. And the fact of the matter is, like, yeah, like when I started the job, I had a normal life. Like, thank God, before I made Clerks, I had 22, almost 23 years of a normal life to pull from. And then my normal life, that's why you get, Clerks. There's a movie about a guy who works in a convenience store because I worked in a convenience store. Mallrats, about kids who hang out at the mall because I hang out at the mall. Chasing Amy is about, a relationship because I had a relationship with Joey Adams and so forth. The Dogma, it's because I was a Catholic school kid for 12 years and an altar boy who giggled every time the priest was like, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And so once you run out of real life, which I did very quickly, because suddenly my life became a fantasy life, you start, kind of mining your real life for more material. And my real life had become making movies for a living. So by the time we get to Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, 5th movie in, I'm writing honestly about life because my life is an honest fucking to God fantasy come true. So it's like I'm making movies about making movies. So I've done, let me see, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. It's kind of a movie about a movie. After that was Jersey Girl, no. After that was Clerks 2, no. Zach and Miri Make a Porno is a movie about the making of Clerks, essentially. Then after Zach and Miri, you get Cop Out, no. Red State, no. Tusk, no. Yoga Hosers, no. Jay and Silent Bob Reboot is a movie about
a movie.
And Clerks 3 is the movie in which they make Clerks. So I keep, I'm still approaching the job as honestly as I did in the beginning by mining my real life. But it's, sadly, my real life doesn't resemble a real life anymore. It's the life of an entertainer. It's a life where I'm like, I get to self-express for a living in the most egregious way, in the most ridiculous fucking art form. If I was a painter, I would take a blank canvas, throw color on it, and you'd know how I felt. If I was a singer, I can open and you would feel my self-expression. But I'm a fucking filmmaker, which means I say stupid things like, I need to self-express. Give me $20 million and Ben Affleck in order to do the fucking thing that I do and stuff. So ultimately, I've been around long enough where I can kind of continue doing what I did to get me here in the first place, telling stories ripped from my own life. But my real life is just not that interesting. It's filled with me making entertainment. It's not filled with shit that people will necessarily relate to. You know what I'm saying? Like Clerks, everybody can relate to because we've all had a shitty job. Clerks 3, people who've had heart attacks can relate to it, and people who are getting old can relate to it, but it doesn't have the universality and stuff. Whereas the 430 movie has the universality of like, well, I've been to the movies and I love movies, and I think movies make life make sense. So by accident, not by design, I wind up making a movie that people are like, hey, fucking finally you're saying something for the rest of us, not just for people that like Jay and Silent Bob. And it wasn't even a conscious effort. It was just like, wow, this is the movie that's in my head and heart and the movie we could afford to make now. It didn't come from a place of like, I need to tell this story. I'm at midlife, so I need to reach back. I've been reaching back since fucking Clerks, for heaven's sakes. I've been nostalgic since the first movie. Instead, I'm like, well, we have a movie theaters that cuts the budget down, and we can only get 3 million and 2 million and change. So we can't go too nuts with our story. I guess we could set it here. And since the whole movie theater looks old as fuck, nobody's ever refurbished it. It's a period piece. It's like our Merchant Ivory movie, for heaven's sake. So suddenly you wind up backing into the quote unquote best movie you've made in years, according to the critical community. Like, I ain't fighting it. It's like, great. I like that they ever like anything we do. But, it surprised me in a delightful way, but still it surprised me when people were like, this is the best movie you've made in years. I'm like, oh, I thought that was Clerks 3. Never mind, my bad. So you realize that everybody's favorite is something different and stuff. I'm just delighted that anyone gives a fuck at this point. And 30 years in, I'm still saying essentially the same shit. And, what does this movie say? Hey, man, movies are great. So, I'm not saying anything revolutionary or new, but apparently what we say in the movie has emotional resonance with folks who treat movies as seriously as me and the characters in the movie have treated them. And thank God Austin pulls that off. Austin Zagier has the unenviable job of playing the young Kevin Smith, and he wasn't there for it, but he fucking nailed it, man. Like, and that is, I grew up to be an entertainer where like every time I speak, I try to do it entertainingly and there's a show to it and stuff like that. But he's playing the version of me, the unadulterated one, like pure Kevin Smith, before he meets Jason Mewes, before he becomes an entertainer, before he becomes a polished podcaster, over the course of fucking 14 seasons.
If it helps, I will now forever think of you as the merchant ivory of dick and fart jokes. So thank you very much for that.
That's what I've been aiming for my whole life. Finally, somebody's saying it.
Finally. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Mr. Kevin Smith.
Do you know, he must have, at some point during that interview, thought, you're a bit of a stalker. You know a bit too much about me.
No, I mean, it's notable. Obviously, this is one of the only times we've ever left the bleeping off on anything, because as you can tell from the clip, you can't stop Kevin Smith from cussing. And true story, actually, because I was so young and impressionable when I discovered the works of Kevin Smith, I was literally 12 years old when I saw Clerks, and that's still to this day one of my very favorite ever movies. Like, I have a page of the script from Clerks on my living room wall. In fact, there is literally a Kevin Smith bobblehead in this studio right now. It's just always been a thing. But because I was so young, he started me being as foul-mouthed as I actually am. So I never got to thank him. But yeah, that's one off the bucket list. Absolute bucket list stuff.
Who's going to be next? That is the question. Watch this space.
Bruckheimer, I'm coming for you.
Right, so a couple of movies left to talk about. We're going to look at Anora in a moment, and I'm going to get this wrong. Is it Heretic?
It is Heretic. You get it right every time. You keep saying
I do.
Am I getting this? And you get it right every bloody time, which is weird because you don't normally. But this one word, for some reason,
just getting stuck on it. But actually, I'm not getting stuck on it. Heretic next. Stay there. Hello and welcome back to Off Screen. We're going to dive straight into our next movie. It is the new one from Hugh Grant, psychological thriller, Heretic. And I will just quickly add, I saw an interview with Hugh Grant this week. He went to Taylor Swift concert with his kids, ended up going to the bar with Taylor Swift's boyfriend, which I keep forgetting.
Travis Kelce.
Travis Kelce. He didn't know it was her boyfriend, didn't know who he was, and got absolutely hammered on tequila with him. I thought it was an absolutely brilliant story.
Fantastic. I wanted to get high with Kevin Smith, but I didn't get the chance. Anyway, that is bucket list stuff right there. Yeah, you are going to love this one.
It looks great.
This is right up your alley. It's right up my twisted little alley as well. So, this is a new A24 movie. Let's just immediately say off the top, it's a damn sight better than the last A24 movie we reviewed, The Front Room, see last week. Although not as funny as The Front Room, has to be said. So, written and directed by Brian Woods and Scott Beck. Stars Hugh Grant alongside Sophie Thatcher from The Boogeyman and Book of Boba Fett. Yellow Jackets. She's one of the cast on Yellow Jackets. And Chloe East, who... relative unknown, has a few credits to her name, but I think very small bit role kind of things. And the pair of them, the two female leads, are about 20 years old. They're young Mormon girls. Young Mormon girls who are doing the touting round town, trying to indoctrinate people, trying to convert people, and they're doing the rounds on the checklist of people who've actually said, yeah, we'd like you to come to our house and chat to us there, kind of thing. They're doing the rounds, and they happen upon Hugh Grant's house, knock on the door, and he's delighted to speak to them, which tells you that something's dodgy straight off the bat, because nobody's happy to have the Mormons round. That never happens, all right? So they should have known something was up. Anyway, he is really studious and knowledgeable and really interested in their faith and invites them in to discuss it further over some blueberry pie that's cooking. His wife is cooking in the background. However, no sooner have they crossed the threshold into his house than the doors shut behind them, the locks clamp shut, and what begins is a night of psychological terror as Hugh Grant starts to menacingly torture the pair of them, psychologically and physically to an extent, until they begin to question their faith. Have a listen.
As I understand it, stop me when I go wrong, he was visited in the night by an angel called Moroni, who showed him where he could locate some golden plates near his home. His mysterious translation of those plates form the basis of this.
Wow! No you read more than we do. No, seriously, we should be more like you, Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed.
Oh, do you know, I love the premise of this. I'm slightly disappointed that A, he wasn't English, and B, he wasn't the same character as in The Gentleman, because that would have made it for me.
Oh, no, he is English. He's definitely English in it. I mean, it never comes up.
But I mean, you know... No, but you know, like the character that he's played in The Gentleman, that sort of Cockney. Like I wanted that.
This is him back on estuary form. This is really good. Right? Okay. I think the ending kind of sucks. For me, the ending kind of sucks, and it doesn't necessarily go as hard as I wish it did at times. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun, this one. Like, he really puts these girls through the ringer. But also, it's very funny. Like, intentionally so. Like, it has a lot of dark comedy to it, particularly at the expense of Hugh Grant. Like, he is swinging from the rafters. You get to hear Hugh Grant do all sorts of weird little quirky vocal things that you never expected. Like, do you know what Hugh Grant sounds like doing a Scottish accent? Because I do now, and it's nuts. Do you know what Hugh Grant sounds like when he's impersonating Jar Jar Binks? Because I do, and it's nuts. It's so out there that the film at one point manages to genuinely challenge American Psycho for greatest use of music to torment someone ever. Do you remember the scene in the greatest music monologue? You know the scene in American Psycho where he does the Huey Lewis monologue and he starts telling you about, in 84 they released 4, when he starts doing that.
Yes.
Hugh Grant does the same bloody thing using The Air That I Breathe by the Hollies and Creep by Radiohead. And it's all part of the same. It's brilliant. It is good fun. I think the performances are just great. The performances are really good. Sophie Thatcher on requisitely fine form. She has been a serious up-and-comer for a couple of years now. Everything she's in, she's nearly always great in. And I'm including the god-awful Star Wars series book of Boba Fett in which she was one of the very American graffiti. Was it American graffiti? Yeah, one of the American graffiti style teenagers that's in the Book of Boba Fett. But she's terrific. For me, the big find was Chloe East. I thought she has tremendous potential off the back of this. But you really cannot ignore the fact that it's Hugh Grant's show. It's absolutely 100% Hugh Grant's show, and he is running away with it. He is having an absolute ball, and you go along with it. He is like a horror movie villain that you are actively rooting for. You know, in that way that you find yourself rooting for Chucky or Art the Clown or Freddy Krueger. You do, in the same exact way, root for this kind of meek British middle-aged man in a cardigan who is just absolutely psychologically destroying these two 20-year-old girls. There's some daft swings here and there. Like, there's a point at which it seems like it's gone into the supernatural, and you're like, maybe wouldn't have done that. But, yeah, it comes together well enough. I'm not a fan of the a bit too tidy ending. I would rather it went a bit more sinister with its end, with its conclusion. And it does kind of feel like a bit of a convenience kind of, but neither here nor there. It's still a 4-star film in my book. I was telling you, I wound up seeing this twice. So I went to the first screening, which was at the Mayfair Hotel a couple of weeks ago. And then the actual week of release press show was in the middle of the day, sandwiched between all the rest of the screenings. So I thought, I'm not going to sit in Starbucks for 2 hours. Screw it, I'll go and see Heretic again. It was a good time. And I think I was about 20 minutes into it. I'm like, yeah, this was a really good decision. This was an excellent. So I'm having a blast all over it. Good fun. Really good fun. And I think this actually previewed on Halloween night. So actually did get to be used as a Halloween movie for some people. But otherwise it was released today, November 1st. I recommend checking it. I think the establishment of its Chekhov guns is quite clever. It's very subtle about it. It doesn't telegraph things too blatantly, but I think it's got just enough smarts to pull off what it's swinging for. I think it's another feather in the already very stocked cap of Hugh Grant lately, because I don't know what medication they switched him to in the last couple of years, but Hugh Grant has just, I don't know, he just all of a sudden he's in The Gentleman, he's in Paddington 2. Like, it's like a different guy. All of a sudden he's very self-aware and funny, and I'm here for it.
I just think if anyone can see a movie twice, it's always going to be good, in my opinion. And I'm a massive Hugh Grant fan. I rate him. I think he's underrated, if anything, to be quite honest with you.
I mean, I will say as well, right, and this is not really a spoiler, but the song over the end credits of this might be one of the most on-the-nose choices I've ever heard. Right?
Oh, God. What did they use?
But this is putting aside that the movie ends with the least subtle visual metaphor this side of The Departed. You remember the rat in The Departed at the end? And you're like, the rat stands for obviousness, The Simpsons famously said. This has a very similar thing at the very end, just completely devoid of subtlety. But they then have over the closing credits, they have the song Knocking on Heaven's Door. They have this cover of Knocking on Heaven's Door.
Oh my God!
I mean, I would have gone with
still there.
Yeah, I would have gone with something like "One of Us" by Joan Osborne, just to really put the cherry on top. But yeah, Knocking on Heaven's Door. You're like, I love it. It's that kind of movie. Imagine, if you will, combining a church service with Saw, and you basically have this movie. The finest way I could say it. I had a good time with it. There is a reference to there's a sort of offhand reference to Hugh Grant's own. Do you remember the Vanity Fair moment? Once upon a time, he was at the Oscars. It was this year. Hugh Grant made
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he made a reference to the novel Vanity Fair, and the idiot reporter thought he was talking about the fashion magazine, the magazine. Right. There's a very subtle dig at that in this movie. I'm thinking, this has to have been made before that. This has to have. Was it a reshoot? I don't know. But there is a thing where he references Voltaire. And you think, yeah, that seems like it's a dig at that. I loved it. I had a really good time with it. Like I say, it's got its flaws, but this could have been a 5-star film. It is a 4, though.
Well, Heretic is in cinemas from today, so you can go and enjoy it and make your own mind up this weekend. One movie left. We're going to look at Anora in just a tick. Stay there. So, hello and welcome back for one last ride with us on Off Screen. We have one more movie, and we're going to tone it down a little bit now with a romantic comedy called Anora. Van, it's over to you.
I can't tell if that was you doing a gag or if you've just mistakenly read that it is a romantic comedy. Because if someone called this a romantic comedy, then someone needs to talk to a therapist, right?
IMDb, bro.
This is the problem. Anyone can put anything on the internet. So, Anora, which is the new movie from writer-director Sean Baker. Sean Baker, I think most prominently known really these days for the Florida Project, I want to say, in the last couple of years, because that got a Best Picture nomination and an Oscar nomination for Willem Dafoe in Best Supporting, if memory serves. And he's, for my money, was, for my money, his best film. This has now usurped that, incidentally. So, a proper indie-style director. He makes very auteur-like, very naturalistic films, but that usually have a weird comic bent to them, that have a slightly absurdist comic bent to them, but appear to take place in a very grounded reality. This has always been his shtick, to be fair. And very notably in his last film, Red Rocket, that was the case. I didn't like Red Rocket, but I get why people do. So, Anora follows a woman whose legal name is Anora, but she goes by Annie, and she's played by Mikey Madison. Mikey Madison is the young, skinny, dark-haired actress who you might recognize from having her face rammed into a telephone by Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh!
You know, at the end of when he smashes her head into the phone. That's her. That's her character. Yeah, she was, of course, one of the villains. She was a villain in one of the most recent Scream sequels as well, 5 or 6. She's one of the killers in that one. And she is Annie, a 22-year-old Brooklyn-based sex worker who primarily works as a lap dancer, but also sidelines in escorting here and there. And one night, by virtue of the fact that she speaks Russian, I think she's meant to be a Ukrainian immigrant, but for all intents and purposes, she sort of seemingly identifies as an American, and certainly sounds very naturalized American. By virtue of being able to speak Russian, she is assigned to this one client in the lap dancing club, who's the son of a Russian oligarch. He then basically pulls off the plot of Pretty Woman, which is, well, why don't I just give you a big chunk of cash and you come and just move into my place for a week? And they do. And it all goes quite well. So well, in fact, they wind up getting hitched. Because they're in Vegas anyway. They get hitched. About 10 seconds later, however, his family find out. And they're really not happy about it. And actually dispatch one of the family goons and his underling minions to basically drag her by the scruff of her neck to the nearest courtroom to get the marriage annulled. But before they can do that, they have to track down the panicked husband, who has now fled into the night to go off on what can only be described as the drug-addled bender to end them all. So I've got a clip for you. This is from the very beginning of the film. This is quite a deadpan kind of sequence. This is Annie at her club arguing with her boss.
Annie, I got a kid who wants someone who speaks Russian.
You know, Jimmy, the girls and I have been talking, and if your cousin doesn't start showing us some respect, we're not gonna tip out anymore.
All right, I'll talk to him.
Who are you talking about, the DJ?
All right, seriously?
He's an
I shared my playlist with him, and he was very rude and dismissive.
You're killing me. Let's go, come on.
No, I'm eating my food.
That's why you have Tupperware, keep things fresh.
He's eating.
He's a spender, come on, let's go.
Time is money, baby. Get a roll on it.
So essentially then, this is Pretty Woman meets The Hangover.
Do you know what? Yes. I would go with that, actually. In fact, you know what? Pretty Woman meets Wolves, the recent Brad Pitt, George Clooney thing, because it has a very similar setting and a very similar energy. It's actually a really fascinating film. Now, this is one that the Cardigans have been leaping all over. So obviously, you know, I'm therefore going to go in very skeptical. Like this is an Oscar frontrunner. Like there's talk about the serious buzz around this potentially being like an Oscar winner. Like I say, I think it's my favorite Sean Baker film. He's always been an interesting filmmaker, and he's always been quite inventive. I think this is the most fun I've ever had with him, but at the same time, I do think it's his strongest film. It's fascinating in that it really goes for a breadth of quite a wide field of tones. There are times when it's quite madcap and funny. There are times when it's quite tense and threatening. There are times when it's very dramatic and moving. And at the centre of it all is Mikey Madison, who I wasn't really sold on as on the idea of her as a lead. You know, like, really? The little skinny chick from Scream whatever? Like, that's your lead? All right, cool. But, oh my God, she wins you over fast. It's a really fearless, really committed performance. And it's got a sort of, I don't know how to describe it, a sort of Margot Robbie energy about it. You know, in that way that Margot Robbie has an undeniable kind of venom in the tank. Like, on top of just, you know, being physically just a goddess, she is also just wonderfully venomous when she gets going and commits to the bit. Mikey Madison has a lot of that going for it too. Also helps that she has a Harley Quinn accent, actually. It might be what spurred me on to the Margot Robbie thing. Because she got that Brooklyn accent, you know, thing going on. And yeah, she's tons of fun. I say I was really taken away by this, and it's something I would very much like to see again. But you hit the nail on the head. Something like Pretty Woman Meets The Hangover or Pretty Woman Meets Wolves. I think you'll have a good time with this. It's very graphic at times as well.
Ooh. But,
like I say, it goes through a breadth of tones. So it can be quite sexually explicit, but at the same time, it can be quite slapstick and, you know, self-aware and perverse. It's a really strange little film, but it really wins you over. Really does. And I don't think Mikey Madison will ever get a role this good again. Not because she's not up to the task, but I just feel like it's the perfect marriage of performer and material and performance. And the three happen, you know, and the right director to guide that. I think it's wonderful. I This instantly crept into my top 10 of the year. Like, there is not a chance that this isn't one of the 10 best films of the year. And, I got to say that like a week ago with The Wild Robot as well. So we're kind of on a roll with Universal movies at the moment.
Well, you can make your mind up and see if it's in your top 10 because Anora is out in cinemas from today. Right, before we finish up this time round then, Van, let's look at some of the movies that we've got for next week. There's one I've got my eye on that I'm really looking forward to, but we'll start with Blitz, which we've got coming up.
Yes, this one I think got pushed back a week or so. This is the Saoirse Ronan one. This is the World War II Steve McQueen Saoirse Ronan movie. I think Harris Dickinson's in it as well. We've got The Piano Lesson with Samuel L. Jackson. That's next week. No Other Land next week. Piece by Piece, the Pharrell biopic. Do you know about this one?
Pharrell, as in happy.
Yeah, Pharrell. Pharrell's made a biopic, right? This is so wacky. So Pharrell's made a biopic. So it's the story of Pharrell, but it's told with Lego. So it's literally animated like the Lego movie. Hence the title, Piece by Piece. Not even... There's even a Lego Martin Luther King. I've seen a screen grab of a Lego Martin Luther King. So at some point that appears in the film. Cole Meany and Paul Reiser are teaming up next week for The Problem with People. Dwayne Johnson meets up with Chris Evans for Red One, which I'm going to the big premiere for on Tuesday night. I'm going to throw my little LED Christmas blazer on and my sparkly sequin Santa hat. Have myself some early Christmas fun. But of course, I think we all know what everyone's not only going to be talking about next week, but also what everyone's still going to be seeing over Christmas.
Yep.
It's, of course, the sequel to the greatest movie ever made, Paddington in Peru, is next week. And I want it known, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. Ball here tragically declined my invitation to the premiere this weekend.
I just needed more notice, otherwise I would have been there.
I didn't have the notice. I never get notice.
I know. I was gutted. Honestly, I would love to have come along to that. But yeah, just a family weekend planned and unfortunately can't change those.
Can you imagine what would have happened if you'd taken Albert to the Paddington premiere? Like, there would be no other dad in his school would stand a chance, right? Like, forever. You would have ruined it.
No, I know.
Every other kid's dad would suck in comparison. Oh, well, Albert's dad took him to Paddington.
I've definitely ruined his street cred for the next few months, not taking him, absolutely. But, next time, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say on that as well, because I'm gutted. I'm not getting to watch it, if I'm honest, this weekend. So yeah, looking forward to all of those. That is, of course, all we have time for this time round. We will return next week. Until then, I've been Adam Ball.
And I've been Van Connor, and we shall be back.